I was in Louisville, Gina and I both were, and for the General Assembly, and it was wonderful. But I think what was particularly wonderful was I was walking one day, and I was cold outside. I didn't know that you could feel that. I thought you had to be like in air conditioning, and Morgan and I were walking, and I was like, I'm cold. What is this? It's weird. But how has it been here? Just insufferable? The same? Just cool? As long as you stay inside and inside the refrigerator in ice cubes, yes. Well, we have another week, and then we have another month or two of this, and then we're in the comfortable 90s. So why did we move here again? I just don't know. But here we are. As tends to be the way I do things, I feel like my whole, I remember when I told you I have one sermon. I feel like I have one sermon title, but then many subtitles. And I think my main title is always Confessions of a Pastor. And because I'm always going to start off with something like, hey, here's me. And I know this one's a shock. They all are a shock to you, I'm sure. But the shock is that I'm a nerd. Yep. Whole life been a nerd. I was a big nerd too. Because my mom, she did so many wonderful things for me. She taught me to read when I was 3. And so I've been reading and I've been a voracious reader. And I remember, did you guys ever have the bookmobile? You remember those things? Yeah. I remember going on the bookmobile and there was this one I loved, one series the Treat Truck. That was really good. But then I knew I was different when in 2nd grade, I wanted to start reading Stephen King books. And they're like, you can't read those. I'm like, why not? They're wonderful. And, but I was always pushing the boundaries of what I should be reading. And so it didn't take long before, I started reading about, believe it or not, even as in grade school, about physics and chemistry and about religion and philosophy. And I just loved, I was like, oh, this whole world, it's so great. And I just never stopped reading. I just loved it. And what happened was I started to realize, and I spent a lot of time inside. We'll just say that. And so I spent a lot of time reading, a lot of time inside. And so I had a lot of ideas. And my dad would always tell me, he's like, you have a lot of theory in that head of yours. And it's like, what do you mean? And I didn't know what he meant. Well, I didn't know what he meant until I kissed a girl for the first time. Because what you have in theory, what you read in the book, is not how it works out. My first example of how theory doesn't work too well. But it really hit me when I became a teenager, and my best friend got me involved with martial arts. And I got involved in wrestling too, so I love combat sports. But that's when I realized, and I started reading all the books about, all this and that. And then, I would come in and I'd be like, oh, I know this and that. And my instructors, who were prison guards, they would be like, do push-ups, do this. And that's when I realized, I was like, what I've read about and all my theory is very different than actually making my body do these things or the work it takes to do that. I mean, I could read about all these techniques and everything, but until I actually practiced them and did them and failed and got hurt and kept going, that's when I really started to see oh, there's a whole other world of how to see things and do things. And that's actually where I kind of switched. I still love reading, I still love doing all that stuff, but as some of you have experienced with me, there's this let's do something, and you're like, how do you do that? I don't know, let's just do it. And so it's I do a lot of practicing before I do some theory, or I do a lot of leaping before I'm looking. But I mean, that's life, isn't it? Really? I mean, think about it. No one, you can read all the Dr. Spock books and everything about how to raise kids, but listen, until, that thing's in front of you, you just got to figure it out. Or finances, or you can do all your Dave Ramsey stuff and everything, but when you got a $700 this bill and a $500 that bill, and it's just my theory's not working, I got to figure this out. But it can keep going on and on and on with these things in life, that there's just a lot of things that you can study and you can have theory about, but until you actually do them, you really don't know what you're doing. I saw this a lot, like in seminary. Like I saw that a lot, where we would study these insanely esoteric things, like some of the pastors in the room, some of the people that have been to seminary, like you got like the theodicy. You know what I'm talking about, Bonnie? The theodicy. You know what that means? It's the problem of evil. Like why do bad things happen to good people? Oh, and they told us all kinds of stuff. We can tell you all kinds of stuff. But you know what? When I remember, this is another lesson I had in seminary. We're reading all this stuff, all this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And then I sit in front of a mother who just lost a 5-year-old daughter. Ain't nothing I learned matter. And until I was there and just saying, Spirit, whatever you got for me, I got to do. And there was a lot of listening, a lot of crying, a lot of hugging, and that was it right there. But you see what I'm saying? Is like, theory's great, but there's this part where practice just has to just happen for you really to understand what's going on. And really, that's how I've adopted like this whole, not leap before you look, but like kind of leap while you're looking kind of strategy in life. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. But there's anything that comes to mind where like oh my gosh, I'm looking at a whole bunch of musicians here. You learn theory, but like until you like do it, right? Or am I wrong? Yeah, I'm right? Oh, good. Ooh, I'm right. That was a wild guess. But anything else where you guys feel like that? Like any professionals in here where you went to school all this time and until you got in the field? Yeah? Social work? Oh, there you go. And you guys are brutalized in school too. What else you guys got? Health profession. What else? Teaching. Yeah, teaching is, once again, teachers. I don't know how you do it. But you see what I'm saying? It's like there's something where theory's good. I'm not bashing on it at all, but like there's the part of it where we're in the practice is really where the growth and the expertise comes from. And here's where I'm gonna poke the bear a little. I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's just me, I feel like that's where part of the problem with the church is. Not this church, I'm talking capital C church. You know what I'm trying to say? It's where we have, and I know many of us in here know what we're talking about. Hey, we love you and you're welcome. How's that really work out, practically? Or like we want to serve and do this and do that, but then we don't show up, or we mostly worry about ourselves, and I think I think the way you would say it is like, I think the way the world looks at us a lot of times is like we talk a good game, but we really don't walk a great one. And that's really what they're challenging. I don't think they're challenging Jesus at all. It's kind of hard. The dude's like, hey, I love you, whatever, gonna make you a better person. I think generally people dig that, but it's just how we go about doing it. And it makes me think of remember when Gandhi, you ever heard that quote by Gandhi? He said, I love your Christ, but not your Christians. And see, I think it was because he was talking about like how we actually practice our faith. There's this really good example. I love this because this is what happens. I've seen it. There was this, seminarians, you had to learn Greek, right? Koine Greek. We had to learn Greek, by the way, guys. So feel sorry for us. But but I've seen it too in like Bible studies, right? We do a lot of Bible studies, not a lot of Bible doings, oddly enough. But like it would be like if someone came to me, like if I came to my daughter and said, clean your room, and she goes, well, I've learned how to say clean my room in Greek. I was like, okay. It's like me and my friends, we got together in our room and we studied what it would look like for me to clean my room. And it's like, doesn't work, does it? But that's what we do, isn't it? That's what we kind of do. And by the way, okay, this is not Christian Bash Fest, because like there's some legit realities, there's legit reasons why we kind of hesitate. Like we feel we don't know what we're doing, we're unqualified, or there's no time, or think about it, like Bonnie, you even said it, it's like the people that are sleeping outside. That is not a small problem to fix. Like, that's not just like, oh, well, let's just do that. No, it's a huge, huge problem. I mean, remember when we were in Louisville and we were in Nashville later? I mean, the homelessness is a lot. It's just all over the place. So how do you solve it? And here's the other thing, too, is just like, it's scary. It's scary. I mean, it's not just come up and talking to somebody and saying hi, but I'm like coming to a person that is homeless or oh my gosh, opening our place up to the, to homeless, or anything where it's just like there's a sense of insecurity or something. These are some really, really big things. And so I want to give you some good news and bad news. The good news is that God's going to be okay. Like, the people are going to be okay. Like, I'm not going to do this guilt trip thing, because I don't think God does guilt, by the way. But like, there's all of us in here who have got that little thing that we got to go do something and we didn't do it. It's okay. God took care of that person. There's nothing that you did bad or anything like that. But I will say the bad news is, and this is maybe where it will get your attention, is the bad news is I think we miss something when we don't engage and don't lead into that nudging. We don't grow. We don't evolve. We don't become fuller expressions of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, because you just can't get around it. When we practice, we tend to grow and we tend to evolve and change. Now, this isn't a Sam thing, by the way. This is a Jesus thing. This is a God thing. And I saw it this week in the Gospel of Matthew. Remember, the Gospel of Matthew is an eyewitness account of this guy named Matthew, and spoiler alert. But it's about in the 14th chapter, and this is well into Jesus' ministry, and after he's gathered the disciples, does a whole bunch of Jesus stuff, teaches a big mess of parables, which we've talked about a little bit. And then Matthew moves on to this scene in chapter 14, beginning in verse 13, and it's a little bit of a plot twist. And Matthew wrote, "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself." Now, what he heard was that there was a ruler named Herod, and he was like over middle Jerusalem, and he had murdered his cousin John the Baptist. Some of you may have heard of him, because Herod had married his sister-in-law, and John was this like yuck, and Herod and Herod's bride was just like, well, cut his head off, and Herod's like, okay, and so John got killed. And Jesus, who knew him since before he was born, was obviously struck with grief. And he withdrew, because when you're sad, you should take some time to yourself, and Jesus is no different. And he went to go, get his head right, get some space. But then, this is what Matthew keeps going in verse 13 through 15. He says, "But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns," heard that he had gone to this place. They didn't care that he was grieving. And so when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and cured their sick. And when it was the evening, the disciples came to it and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowd away so that they may go to the villages and buy some food for themselves." And so there's a whole bunch I could say there. But what's interesting is, I think if you've read this before, we kind of like look at the disciples and go, dude was grieving. He was sad. He had all the rights in the world, but he still came down and he healed and he talked and he did all these things with people. And then the disciples are just like, okay, it's nighttime. We're going to send him off, Jesus, so we can kick back a little bit. And I'll say this: they're not wrong. They're not wrong. Because, the crowd was hungry. The disciples were hungry. They were in the middle of nowhere. Jesus was grieving. It seems like the caring thing to do. Like, hey, go home, get some. We're going to be here tomorrow. It's okay. We're going for a couple more years, y'all. It's a tour. And so they were just like, that's the right thing to do, just to do the caring thing and let them go. But Jesus says something different. He goes on in verse 16 and he says, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. So Jesus he didn't say anything about what they did, but he was saying the right and caring thing to do is to feed them, and not just feed them, but you feed them. Don't you hate that? You know what I mean? I mean, that's happened to me so many times where I see something, I'm confronted with something. Like it just happened, like this going up at the trip. Somebody had called and they needed somebody to do a funeral, and I'm just like, and I was just like, oh, I don't want to do it. But I know I should do it. And do you know what I'm talking about? You're just confronted with it, and you're just like, ugh. Like, and you say to yourself, sometimes we do this. Sometimes we'll go, well, someone else should help them. Someone else should help them. And I used to say this a lot back when, I never did this because I think it was mean, but that's a big question people ask, like, especially when you don't believe, like atheists or people that are struggling, they're like, why won't God fix this? Why won't God do this? And sometimes we do that. God will, and I feel like God looks at us quite often and says, yeah, why don't you do something about it? But we're all guilty of that. We all do it. But that's when the excuses come, right? When we get that nudge, we're like, oh, I don't have time. I don't know what I'm doing. There's all these things, and that's fine. And the disciples are no different, because in verse 17, they do what we do, and they said, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes, which, by the way, is not a lot. I mean, Peter was a big guy. He could probably polish that off on his own. And so there's not enough. And they're like, bruh, like, we're not prepared for this. We ain't got no food. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're not equipped. We're the wrong people. There's a billion reasons why this is wrong, Jesus. So, what are you talking about? But watch what Jesus does. Verse 18, this is all he says. He goes, bring them here to me. That's what he says. And so it's funny what Jesus does here. He goes, just bring me. He says on the outside, because there's always a thing behind the thing when Jesus says stuff, Because the thing he's saying is like, bring them to me. Bring the loaves and fishes to me. That's what he's saying. But he's saying something else too, isn't he? He's saying, bring me what you have. Not the fish, not the loaves, you. Bring me what you have. And so, like, think about this. Because so every time when we're led in those situations, Jesus, like, Jesus, I don't have time. He's like, but just bring me what you have. Or like, I'm not equipped for this. I don't have the talent, I don't have the skill. He's like, just bring me what you have. Or like, I don't know enough. I don't have enough. Bring me what you have. Jesus, I've been hurt. Bring me what you have. And that's what the disciples did. They brought Jesus what they had, and they brought Jesus what they had, if you know what I'm saying. So in verse 19, Matthew goes on, he says, then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and he looked up to heaven and blessed, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowd. And see, you see what happened there? The disciples brought Jesus what they had, which was nowhere near enough. Jesus brought what he had, which is always going to make something more than enough. And then the disciples came back and brought what they have, which is like all they knew how to do was like, well, we'll just start handing out this stuff until it runs out. That was it. And then this is what happened, ending in verse 21. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over in the broken pieces, 12 baskets full, and those who ate were about 5,000 men besides women and children. You see what can happen? When we bring what we have, Jesus brings what he has, and then we bring back what we have, and something happens. Like every time. It may not be like this, for sure. I don't feel like you got leftovers, but that always happens. When we bring what we have, that Jesus brings what he has. Because there's a place where your faith will go, because there's something else. There's a thing behind the thing here. Because when we act on that, there's a place where our faith will go and evolve and change when we decide to step out and do just what we got, what we have in our hand. Because it's not about just like meeting a need or being good disciples or whatever it is. It's about where we really get to practically, not theoretically, put in our faith. Like faith, like, listen, there's nothing on the surface. I ain't got nothing, but I'm going to give what I got. And then God will work with it. And see, what's interesting here, this is really the first time Like the disciples overtly experienced this. And there's many more coming, because right after this, and I'm going to talk about this next week. This is like a 2-part sermon I never meant to do 2 parts on. But like right after this is when Peter walks on water, by the way. This is when Peter gets called the Rock. And I mean, I can go on. There's a bunch of stuff that happens. But this was the first time, I think, that they moved beyond theory and started moving into like how to practice this as followers of Jesus. Because I think that's when they started to see, like, when we bring what we have, Jesus brings what he has, and then something miraculous happens. The world gets fed, healed, grows, but so do we. So did they. And when they move past the theory and into practice, in other words, when they leap while they're looking, studying the theory while they're practicing. And so if anything, like, I want you to think about this as like, if you're looking to grow, if you're looking to evolve, if you're looking to mature, really growing requires going. There's no way around it. Because it's so much more than just like feeding others or caring for others or bringing the kingdom of God on earth. Like, that's a small thing. I just throw that out there like it's no big thing. It is a big thing. But it is about growing the kingdom of God in us. And I think sometimes, and I'll do something uncomfortable, we'll talk about the little things. It's like, oh, I'm going to help this person. I'm going to feed this person. I'm going to do the drum circle. And those are all important things. And I'm not saying they're small, but we don't want to talk about the hard things. Like, how do you, like when James says, consider it pure joy when you're in trials, sufferings of many kinds. So we never talk about it like that. Like, how do we keep our faith when we're suffering? You see? And like Merton calls it the dark night of the soul. You ever heard the story about Mother Teresa where she didn't feel God's presence for decades? And she still got up every morning and did things. I mean, I would say this is where for me, like, I feel like a very big part of my faith was a lot of theory. I did a lot of practicing, don't get me wrong. And I remember I've said so many eloquent, beautiful things about suffering and about maintaining your faith and stuff like that. But let me tell you, y'all, last couple years, it's been hard. It's been hard to wake up and be like, how many people, I mean, I know pastors in the room have felt this, but I know everybody else, how many times you wake up, it's like, do I even believe any of this? Like, what is this? Yeah. But you see, and we could stop right there. We could say, that's it, and we can send the crowds away, or we can go, well, I'm going to get up and just, what is it? There's actually a philosophical term for it. It's Pascal's wager, just pretend like something actually is real. But that's a funny thing. When you pretend like something actually real, it becomes real. And that's where our faith grows, where we can consider it pure joy when we're experiencing trials and sufferings of many kind, where we can be in our lowest depths and go, you know what? I just know God's going to carry me through this. God's going to carry this person through this. That's where the growth happens. And so, like, ask you a couple questions. Where do you need to grow? Because I have a sinking suspicion that wherever you need to grow is where God is going to send you to go. Now, that's not just necessarily serving somebody. It may be about your internal, like, development, your internal maturity. And somehow, some way, usually those things are connected, by the way. But where do you need to grow? Where do you need to go? Like, do you need to feed one person? Do you need to serve at a Just Love event? Do you need to step up in leadership here? Do you really need to forgive that person? Do you really need to live into what it means to suffer with joy? Whatever it is, there's a point where I can promise you where the theory is running out, and we just have to step forward and start moving and into practice, where we have to leap while we're looking, because growing requires going. And we'll talk more about Peter next week. But I've never done this with you guys before, but this was always one of my favorite things. A Franciscan taught me this. I'd be a good Franciscan, maybe. I don't know. I always wanted one of those brown things. But like to sit in silence and I promise I'm only going to do this for 120 seconds. That's 2 minutes. we can do it. But here's the thing. It's crazy when we actually just sit and just settle into the silence and don't talk to God. Just sit in silence and prepare yourself to just listen. I'm not saying you'll hear anything. If you didn't take your ADD meds like me this morning, you might have a whole bunch of thoughts, and that's fine. But some of us will, and I have a sinking suspicion you will too. So let's just take 120 seconds. Let's really earnestly open ourselves up to those questions of like, where do we need to grow? Where do we need to go? 120 seconds. Gracious God, thank you for these words, these texts that you've saved for us thousands and thousands of years, telling us who you are and who we are. And thank you for Matthew to take the time to really write this account down, to show us the thing on the top, but so thankful for your Spirit that you show us deeper meaning into all of this. And we're so thankful for all the ways you've spoke to us through the years with wisdom and theory and big ideas, but we're also so thankful that you continually keep inviting us in to step forward into this, not just keep this in our head or our heart, but make this a physical reality of what it looks like to bring the kingdom of God here on earth. And so whatever you spoke to each of us here about where you encourage us to live into our identity as your children more fully, how you encourage us to step forward to see other of our siblings and how we can serve and love them. I pray that your Spirit will continue to speak to us, that you give us your eyes to see and your ears to hear and your heart that is open and willing to evolve, to change, to grow into the people you've always created us to be. Give us courage and wisdom to be the church you've always envisioned, that you've always intended us. So I pray this all humbly in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Lord, make us instruments of